Okay, so I finally watched Killers of the Flower Moon recently, and since a lot of new subscribers came from my video about that story, I'll quickly share some of my thoughts on it. I definitely don't want to use any footage from the movie trailer for copyright reasons, so I'll just use some B-roll home movies from the Prelinger archive. Before we get into the movie, there's one thing about my video that's been bothering me that I want to address. I knew this before I watched the movie since there were a few comments about it, but there was one detail I got wrong in my video that might be confusing if you're comparing it with the movie. It concerns Bill Smith, who was one of the victims in the murder spree. In my video, I said that he was Osage, but he wasn't. In fact, he was a white man, as portrayed in the movie. So this is what happened. In the book by David Grann, there is no picture of Bill Smith. When I was editing my video about 2 years ago, I came across this photograph on a site that I've used for reference before, and I couldn't find that picture anywhere else. The picture is of a man who certainly looks Native American, and as you can see, it's labeled as being Bill Smith. After I watched the movie, I did a little digging, and I'm pretty sure that the man in the photo is actually this Osage man who was also a victim in the murders, named William Stepson. And if we look at the two pictures side by side, I think it's pretty clear that it's the same person. Both are named William, so that could explain the mix-up. And in the article with that photo, it referred to Smith as Osage. My copy of the book didn't have an index, and I can't remember if it explicitly stated that Bill Smith was white, but yeah, I just wanted to address that. There is definitely a lesson here. Always cross-reference your sources. I should have been tipped off by the fact that Bill Smith is just about the whitest name ever, but these things happen, especially when the research is a one-man job. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's move on to the movie. But a disclaimer, I'm not a professional movie critic, so if you don't like or agree with my opinions, you can use that as a reason. My expectations were pretty high, because Martin Scorsese consistently makes highly praised movies, and he casted two skilled veteran actors in lead roles, Leo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, and utilized as many Osage and Native American actors as was feasible, I imagine. I will say that it didn't really feel like it was 3.5 hours long. The pace for a lot of these sorts of movies is usually fairly slow, but at least in this case, it didn't drag for me. I know a lot of people in the comments of my video had a problem with how Ernest Burkhart was characterized in the movie. As I interpreted it, he wasn't entirely condemned, but rather shown as being completely misled by his uncle William Hale, and loving money more than is probably healthy. And despite slowly poisoning his wife Molly and nearly killing her, he apparently still loved her. It's hard to tell fact from fiction here because while we have plenty of facts about the case, people's complicated emotions are practically impossible to definitely confirm. It's impossible for most of us to imagine harming someone that we truly love just for the sake of money. But then, towards the end, when Ernest denies to Molly that he put something else in her insulin, it definitely leaves some questions about his character and motivations. Does he actually love her? Did he ever love her? Is it some weird middle ground? It's things like that that make me like a lot of Scorsese movies. A lot is left open to interpretation. But there were some choices that I wasn't so sure about. The biggest one for me was Molly's character. I really couldn't understand how Ernest was so drawn to her. Now, I know what some people are gonna say, that he only wanted her money from the get-go. And that's certainly a fair interpretation. And if that's how you interpret it as portrayed by the movie, you can ignore my point. However, if we assume that Ernest truly loved Molly, it was a bit confusing for me. I have no idea if it was an acting problem or a direction problem or something else, but she just seemed a bit bland and uncharismatic. In the original book, we don't really get a detailed description of Molly's personality as far as I can remember, which is something that's usually impossible to include when practically everyone who knew a person is dead and gone. In the earlier scenes of the movie, when she and Ernest get to know each other, nearly every line of hers was delivered kind of flat and without much emotion or personality. Maybe that was to emphasize the difference between Molly and her sister Anna, whose characterization was full of personality. Maybe the people involved with the movie did get a good idea of the real-life Molly's personality, and that's just how she was. I don't know. It's mostly the calmer moments that seemed a bit off to me. Later on, I thought Lily Gladstone did a really good job expressing Molly's grief and suffering, which might hint at it not really being an acting problem. Another thing really stood out to me, though I wouldn't necessarily call it a problem exactly. One of the victims in the murders didn't get any attention in the movie, and that was the lawyer W. W. Vaughn, who was trying to help the Osage during the Reign of Terror and was murdered and his body thrown from a train. After going over the details of this part of the story again, I think it might be because the circumstances of Vaughn's murder were especially vague and couldn't be sufficiently connected to Hale. Readers of the book will remember that Gran posits, with good evidence, that Hale probably hadn't been the only one ordering people's deaths. So I'm guessing that the movie just wanted to stick with the Hale, Ernest, Molly narrative. Vaughn's story was one of the most memorable parts of the book for me, because he was killed while pursuing a noble cause, and left behind a wife and 5 children. I just kept waiting for him to come up in the movie, but he never did. It's not really a criticism since there were legitimate reasons for not including his story, but it was something that immediately came to my mind. And side note, seeing that the first W in Vaughn's name stood for William, I'm just now realizing how many Williams were part of the story. There's William Vaughn, William Hale, William aka Bill Smith, and William Stepson. Maybe it's just me, but I thought the story ended rather abruptly, and I'm not so sure about the epilogue being told through a radio show performance. I mean, I do appreciate that radio was given some love and average people could see how radio shows back then were made, but it kind of came out of nowhere. I was also slightly unclear about when that radio show was supposed to be. They talk about Hale dying, which was in 1962, and I'm going completely from memory here, but I think that Scorsese, in his cameo, talked about Ernest living out his days wherever he moved to, I forget. To me, that implies up until his death, but maybe I'm wrong. And he died in 1986, which was past the brief old-time radio revival of the mid-1970s, so that was a bit of a head-scratcher for me. And there was a live audience, which makes it seem like it was at a time when radio was still popular for programs like that. But anyway, these details are not really that important. The bigger question is about whether or not it was a fitting ending or not. Personally, if I could choose, I would have focused on how this whole experience affected Molly and Ernest Burkhart's children. The book talks about how they were ostracized from the community after Ernest confessed and went to jail. I just thought it would have been a good way to show how the Reign of Terror continued to damage lives long after it was over. But who do I think I am, a movie director? But I could also see how the radio show's slightly sensationalistic tone could be a commentary about how tragedies like this were viewed by the public in the decades after it happened. I guess that's something you can chime in the comments. I know I focused mainly on negative things, and maybe it seemed like I didn't like the movie from this video, but I actually did enjoy the movie. Well, enjoy really isn't the right word for such subject matter, but you know what I mean. But real movie critics have already done a lot of the praising, so I thought I'd focus on perhaps less talked about things and throw out some possible explanations without reading any context about the behind the scenes of the movie. A lot of you already shared your thoughts about the movie in my other video, but if you didn't, then be sure to voice your thoughts in the comment section of this video, so we can collect some more opinions. Did you agree with any of my points or disagree with everything I said? Let me know. Well, that's all for now, all you sheiks and gals out there, but stay tuned for more tales from the Jazz Age.